Hey, good evening, folks. This is Dr. Talley. Excited to be here with you folks tonight. We're going to do our Path to USMLE Success webinar tonight. With the USMLE-Rx team and the Rx coach team. Should be fun. Should be a fun talk. We also often call this the first day for the USMLE Step 1 talk, a really short version. So again, my name is Talley. I am an associate clinical professor of allergy immunology at the University of Louisville, but you folks know me better as the editor for First Day for the USMLE Step 1, Step 2 CK, Step 3, and also I'm the Chief Education Officer for USMLE-Rx, which is our QBanks, videos, flashcards, and ScholarRx, which is our curriculum and education instructional resources like Rx Bricks. We have some fantastic Rx coaches tonight that are going to be helping to answer your questions. So I'm going to introduce you to them. So the first one is Sean Nanji. Sean, please introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lim. My name is Sean Nanji. I've been with Rx Coach now for about 3 years, working with our coaches and students just like you. Looking forward to answering your questions tonight, and happy to be here.
Excellent. We also have Paras Vergaria. So Paras, you want to say hi?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Lee. Hey guys, my name is Paras. I'm a current dermatology resident, and I'm also an Rx coach. So I work one-on-one with students such as yourselves to help prepare you guys for the Step 1, Step 2 CK, and I will be helping to field some questions in the chat box.
Excellent. So let me explain what's going to happen here. So as I am going through this discussion about preparing for this, very important exam, as you heard Sean and Paras say, they will be answering questions in the Q&A box. So, on the right, if you're on a PC or I think Macs do this too, on the right side, you'll see kind of a control panel, and one of the tabs says questions. If you open that up, that will allow you to ask a question directly to Sean and Paras. They'll be happy to answer anything they can, at a kind of a thematic level. They can't obviously be super specific, obviously, since they don't really know you all that well. But as I mentioned, they are part of our amazing Rx Coach program, which we'll talk about at the end, where you can talk to them later through a free consultation, see how they can help you in terms of preparing for the USMLE or just getting through school, or anything else, including getting into a U.S. residency as well too. So feel free to fire away. And with that, let's just jump right in. All right. So the first, the first word that we always think about, when preparing the exam, may not be yours, is relax. But this is the first word in First Day for the USMLE Step 1. It's really about keeping the long view, not getting panicked, not rushing into things, thinking it all the way through. And if you do it, you'll likely come out just fine on the other side. So over the next 50 minutes or so, we're going to talk about USMLE Step 1 basics, defining your goals, USMLE updates, and there has been just a major update in the last couple of days. We'll talk about timelines for studying, how you approach subjects, choosing prep resources, some general study advice that the Rx coaches usually counsel their mentees. We'll talk a little bit more about Rx Coach and Rx Bricks and what's new with all that. And then at the very end, we have a special raffle and a special offer. The raffle does include 5 Rx coaching sessions, 6 months access to Rx 360 Plus. Again, that includes our question banks, our videos, our digital flashcards, and our curriculum bricks. And then we'll open it up for some Q&A, and then we'll also we'll give you a special offer where you can save a bundle on USMLE-Rx and Rx test prep and learning resources. So there you go. All right, so let's start off with a question. I want to see who all is out there tonight. I know you are taking time out of your busy schedule, so we want to know who you are, so we can perhaps slant the talk a little bit as necessary to address your perspective situation. So you'll see a poll. Go ahead and click and answer. and it'll be open for about 20 seconds. For whatever reason, I think perhaps just with distance, all that, we have a ton of international folks. Sometimes it takes a couple of seconds for your responses to register, so go ahead and just pop in and answer. Right now, it looks like I see half of you responding. I'm going to wait till we get closer to 70%, just to make sure you guys are awake and you can find the the polling software, or I'm sorry, the polling mechanism. All right, we are now at 70%. Let me go ahead and stop the collection and share the results. As we can see here, most folks out there are international medical graduates, but we also have a fair number of medical students, mostly allopathic, some osteopathic. So welcome everybody. I'm going to ask a second question. All right, so let me go ahead and pop up this next question, which is, when do you plan on taking the USMLE Step 1? Is it like right now, before the thing goes past fail, or sometime afterwards? So let me launch that poll, and you should again be seeing a set of options. Go ahead and pick an option, and we'll see where folks end up. Looks like we've got about 30 of folks who have answered. We'll leave it open for another 10 seconds. And again, I know that there's, given the number of international students and graduates that are out there tonight, it may take a little bit of time just to register all the results. All right, we got 70% who have answered. Let's go ahead and close and share that. And what we see is a group that's really, really looking far down the line. So most of you will be actually taking it after the exam goes past fail. So we'll definitely emphasize some of the things that are going to be happening distally, and won't be talking about as much with regards to the scoring, because that's not going to have as much of an impact. All right, cool. So I think we've closed the poll. Let's get back to the presentation. So let's talk about the exam itself. All right, so the exam is a one-day exam, 8 hours in total. There are 7 one-hour blocks, each with 40 questions apiece. So that's 200 questions, in a day, and you get a minimum of 45 minutes of break time. You'll notice here we have a schematic. And you can see the 7 blocks, but you also have an orientation block as well too. And the thing to remember here is that this orientation block is the same block that you can get access to if you just go to usmle.org and download their application, install it or whatever. And they have an orientation. They have the very same orientation block, and they actually allocate you 15 minutes. So what you do is that you jump all you need to do is jump into this block, use it to adjust your headphone volume. Oh, sorry. So that so you're all set with that, and then jump right out. And you should have close to 15 extra minutes of break time, right? Because any time that's left over in a block goes to your overall break time. So that's what you should be starting off with. If you're only spending 30 seconds to a minute just to go in and adjust your headset. Somewhere along the way, you're going to be taking breaks and so forth. We'll talk about strategies for that later. All right, so on the exam, there's really only one type of question, which is the single best answer question, right? And so that'll be question called the STEM, lead in, and then, sorry, my mouse is twitchy today, apologize. Excuse me. Obviously you'll need to choose from anywhere between 4 or 5 to 7 distractors choices. A couple of the questions have multimedia, audio, video, so that's why you do need to keep the headphones handy. Vast majority of the questions are case-based, most of the exam, so either a clinical case or scenario. And the majority of the questions are multi-step questions. So they integrate multiple questions, concepts together. They may start with pathology, go to pharmacology, or pathology, go to clinical, to go to mechanisms, or go to genetics, or something like that. So here's an example. A 32-year-old woman presents with a 5-day history of occasional double vision and bilateral ptosis. And then it goes on to ask, what is the most appropriate diagnostic test? So, when you first think about this, when you if you were to work with one of our ex-coaches, they'll take you through a 7-step process to break down and dissect a question. In fact, we do whole webinars just about this. I'm going to just do a very abbreviated version here. You're going to focus on, the lead-in. So, what's the question trying to get at? And you automatically realize by the nature of that question that this is going to be a multi-step question, right? Because since you have clinical history, you would naturally think that the first thing they would want to know is the diagnosis. And of course, you do need to have a sense of what the diagnosis is, but that's not what the question is. It's asking about what's the appropriate diagnostic test once you actually, have a sense for what the diagnosis is, right? So this is a 2-step question. So then you go back through and you pick out the symptoms of the presentation. Young woman, double vision, bilateral ptosis. That's a metric. From a clinical pattern standpoint, this is mostly going to be, something like myasthenia gravis. You could argue for multiple sclerosis. That would be safely in the differential. But what makes that less likely is that the findings in multiple sclerosis tends to be unilateral. So and with myasthenia gravis, it tends to affect small muscles that are used all the time, like your eye muscles, right? So therefore you get the bilateral ptosis and the double vision. And so if it is myasthenia gravis, then the most appropriate diagnostic test in the United States would be a anti-acetylcholinesterase antibody assay. Classically, you asked this question 10, 15 years ago. It would have been a challenge with a short-acting acetylcholinesterase inhibitor called edrophonium, or otherwise classically known as the tinselin test. That drug is still available in some places of the world, but like I said, in the United States, it's mainly been replaced by the antibody assays. But again, the more important point is that you can see this is how a classic 2-step question can show up. Sometimes they do have 3-step questions. Sometimes they have some problem-solving questions, and these are the ones that can make or break it in terms of either doing well in the exam, or obviously you're taking it before next month, by next month, or passing. Okay. All right. Let's jump right into what the interface looks like. It's pretty straightforward. It's going to be on PC when you go to the Prometric Testing Center. You'll see, of course, that you got your question here with the clinical case being the stem. The actual question itself is the lead-in. You've got a minimum 4 choices. Most of the time you're going to get 5, sometimes 6, rarely 7. About 15-20% of the time you're going to get some sort of visual information that goes along with it. Could be a diagram, could be a gross path, could be some clinical imaging. You've got navigations on the tools on the left, the top and the left. You have the timer for the block and the entire day right here at the bottom left, and then you've got the ability to lock the block if you have to get up, use the bathroom or the restroom, and so forth. However, the timer still goes. While you are in a block, when you are answering questions, you can change any answer you want until you exit the block. Once you exit the block, you cannot go back in and change any of the answers. The other thing to keep in mind is that you are not penalized for guessing. Unlike again in the United States, if you remember the SAT and some of those exams, they penalize you for guessing. That's not the way it is with USMLE. So you should never, ever leave any of these dots visible anymore. Anytime there's a little dot, that obviously represents a unanswered test. If you finish the block while there is still time remaining in this block, then that time rolls over into your free time for the rest of the day. Just kind of like remember, when you were doing, when you kind of do a quick blow, tour of that orientation block. All right, so again, quick orientation of this interface, pretty straightforward, and obviously you'll see it in our simulation tools in USMLE-Rx. Let's talk about scoring and passing. So for now, and for all you folks who are going to be taking it for a score, it's going to be 194. It's going to change after that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The mean has been hovering around 229, 230. It bounces around. The standard deviation has been also steady at 20. And there is a rightward skew in the distribution, and so you kind of so the bulge is to the left, and you recall the bird's beak in the skew is towards the right. For U.S. medical students, almost every medical student will pass within 3 tries, and for IMGs, whether you are born in the U.S. or born internationally, greater than 90% of you will eventually pass the USMLE Step 1. Though, as you can see, it can be challenging to pass it on the first try. All right. With regards to percentiles, you can see the percentile and the score maps out to this S-shaped curve, and you can see as you approach 275, 270, it gets exponentially harder to go any higher, right? Because you're really hitting the top of the scale there. Again, there's about 5 to 6% on average who do not pass, and you can see that the 50th percentile is roughly at around 230, 229. All right, so this is going to be relevant for the 8 or 10%. And I think probably by this time you've probably set your goals already with regards to passing, beating, or acing the exam. And again, for some of you, you may be looking at very competitive specialties, or you're an IMG. You might be wanting to perform well to set yourself apart from other candidates, right? So all of these are valid reasons to aim for a high score. But again, for the bulk of you, that's going to be a moot point. So as we all know, USMLE is on track to go pass-fail by joining one choice on or after. So it could be after, right? So if your exams on January the 27th, don't necessarily hold your breath that it's going to be pass-fail. If you take the exam before then and now up till it goes pass-fail, a common question is, what's going to happen to your score on USMLE transcripts? It will continue to be reported on USMLE transcripts, even if you apply for residency several years later. The reporting only is related to when you take the exam, not when you apply to the residency. This is hot off the presses just a couple of days ago. NBME announced that they will be raising the passing standard for USMLE Step 1 by 2 points for examinees testing after the pass-fail, right? So it's 194 and 197. That's going to be now the cut point. So so there is a chance that a slightly higher percentage of students in IMGs will fail, after that. So just keep that in mind. For the osteopathic students that are here, and I know a number of you are going to be taking the Step 1. Obviously, you're already aware that your column exam will go pass-fail later this spring. All right, let's now talk about a little bit about how the data impacts you. And again, this really is mostly relevant for the those that are taking in the next 2 months. What you'll notice is that that there is, you can see a rough correlation in higher scores for those that are applying into very competitive specialties. This is a very old graph. Won't spend too much time. I used to, this is more helpful for U.S. medical students, which is basically say, even if you perform badly, and this is really old data, and back then the pass-fail threshold was like closer to 185 or something like that. Even if you in fact failed the exam back then, you still had a fairly high probability of matching into a specialty, as long as it wasn't super competitive, like internal medicine, family medicine, pediatrics, that type of stuff. If you're a US student and you're going into competitive specialty, there was a fairly steep dose response curve, flatter if you are an international medical graduate. So that's worth keeping in mind. By the way, and again, back then, the median, the average score was closer to 210, 215 as opposed to 230. So this is where you would have been, if you were into something very competitive. But again, a lot of this is now going to be shifting to step 2. There is going to be some similarities, but I think the curves are going to shift tremendously once we get a couple of years worth of data, and once the system equilibrates with students taking their step 2 and program directors potentially using that as part of their screening tool. So that's a lot of info there, and again, this is this area is rapidly in flux. So I'm going to launch this here just to get a sense. Even if I just want to know, even if you're taking the exam after the boards, they'll still give you some sense of where you're at in terms of your competency. Where would you really want to be, right? In terms of your mastery of the exam. And again, just remember that there is no wrong answer. Passing is perfectly fine. I went to a very competitive medical school, and I had several classmates that are like, yeah, I'm happy with passing, because it really had no relevance to their career trajectory. All right, so we've got about 2/3 of you folks answering the question. I think that's plenty of data. Let me go ahead and close the poll and share. And interestingly enough, you can see that the majority of you, or I'm sorry, just over half of you, around half of you, want to ace the exam. And so that's still pretty high, even though most of you are going to be taking the exam after it goes pass fail. So I think the instinct, the drive to perform well is alive. Even on an exam that that's just gonna that's just pass fail. All right, let's pull down the poll. Let's continue here. So in the just pass, and again, this is really could be quickly becoming a moot point here. If you're just passing, in terms of a kind of a high level approach, it's really about hitting the highest yield subject. So first aid, it's going to be super helpful, of course. You're going to be focusing on crammable subjects. We'll talk about that. And you're probably going to be doing, but nevertheless, you're going to be doing lots of questions, at least probably 2 question banks. If you need to perform higher, or if you historically struggled with standardized exams, you will need to think about more in-depth preparation, right? So that means reviewing all the major subject areas, including some lower yield areas, and doing maybe even up to 3 question banks, right? So getting above 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 questions, in terms of making sure that you feel comfortable and really master some of the critical thinking and clinical reasoning patterns that show up. In terms of choosing study strategies, all of you have gotten this far. Congratulations in your career. So you have certain strategies that have worked well, and a lot of them will continue to do that. Though there is some data to say there may be certain things that you might want to go against your intuition on. We'll talk about that in a bit. You're also going to need to think about the structure and characteristics of your subject. So certain things like microbiology and pharmacology are well suited to tables because of the predictable organization conceptually of that information. Whereas things like physiology is more subject dependent, is more relationship dependent. You also need to think about the strengths and weaknesses of your curriculum. So depending on where there are gaps, you may obviously need to supplement that with external resources, and also how well they integrate that, right? So again, one of the themes that you're going to keep hearing from me is that there's a deep integration of all these interrelated concepts. Again, that's why you see the, like for example, in QMAX, we like to do a lot of complex 2-step, 3-step questions. And then the amount of time that you have to study, right? If you're doing something like pathology, you're going to spend potentially weeks, sometimes months studying, so that you're going to be able to do, deploy a number of different techniques. Whereas if it's going to be something like just neuroanatomy, that may be just 1 or 2 days of dedicated studying, and then just integrate with the rest of the stuff, or lots of question banks. So those are some of the guidelines to keep in mind in terms of study strategies. I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so going through, at a high level, what's high yield, low yield in the various disciplines, and of course you can apply them to organ systems. The 2 themes that you're going to keep seeing me reiterating is integration, again, as I say, integrate, as well as clinical application. Again, even though they call the USMLE Step 1 a basic science exam, it's very much a clinical exam in the sense that it's the basic science that informs what's happening with the clinical observations and so forth. So it's really important, you have a good feel for the clinical presentations of a lot of these conditions. 80% of the time, the very first step to getting well on your way to solving is what's the diagnosis, right? So anyway, let's hop right in. Again, anatomy, you're going to see here that the traditional, particularly cadaveric anatomy, the gross anatomy, is low yield. But any anatomy knowledge with regards to that underlies specific diseases, injuries, procedures, can be high yield, right? So, for example, they may ask you questions about, guy who comes to the emergency room with a spiral fracture of the humerus, right? And then they're going to ask, well, what kind of motor deficits, and sensory deficits may they have in their hand? And then you'll have to realize, oh wait, the fracture impacts the humeral groove. In the humeral groove runs a certain nerve, and then what is that nerve responsible for with regards to sensation and motor functions in the hand, right? And then you'll be able to go from there. As I mentioned, there's a couple of smaller subsections of anatomy that can be high yield. Again, keep thinking about anything that's clinically relevant. All the imaging tends to be clinically relevant. X-ray, CT, MRIs, again, so they're not going to be putting cadavers there, right? You're not treating cadavers, you're treating live human beings, right? They still have a chance, right? So obviously you'll be dealing with MRs, EMs, and so forth. Okay, biochemistry is one of those more crammable subject areas, and again, they're crammable because there's a logical pattern that keeps repeating with that information, particularly with metabolic pathways, right? You always have the substrate, you got the enzymes and key regulatory enzymes and stuff like that, and the product. And so you got to figure out what goes in, what goes out, how's it managed, and then what happens when it gets mucked up, right? Vitamin deficiencies, metabolic genetic disorders, that type of stuff. So that's the pathobiochemistry. Micro is also crammable or more crammable because, again, of the recurring logic of the information, right? What is a bug? How is it? Identified? Where does it go? How does it get there? How do you make the diagnosis? How do you treat it? Any vectors and reservoirs. So there's a familiar rubric that keeps occurring. I'll just jump up here and just say that when we think about microbiology, we often jump to bacteriology, but that's, as you can see, less than half the story. These days, with the world engulfed in a global pandemic, it's so important to know the immune response. We always we always take this for granted, but now more than ever, you need to know how vaccines work. And in fact, on the boards, they tend to test you about what's happening when the immune response goes wonky or is manipulated by vaccines. And so that's what you really need to focus on here. All right, pathology is a big subject. I don't care if you're just, taking the exam next year and you just want to pass, you will be spending time in pathology, right? So when you do that, it's really about knowing and learning the clinical presentation. And while obviously there's a lot of times where you'll get a classic presentation, sometimes they will throw tough presentations, particularly if it's a common disorders, right? Asthma, diabetes, hypertension can while they have their own classic presentations, right, that you get out of high yield texts like first aid and so forth, there's also a lot of variations to how they present, and sometimes they can present like other conditions. So you got to keep an eye out for all the fancy, all the ways they can show up, right? They don't need to pick up the most common way, right? And the same thing with age, ethnicity, and so forth. You'll notice that they may not spend as much time here, especially with ethnicity, as because there's been an issue with implicit racial bias in some of these questions. So you're seeing more of that. But if it does show up, keep in mind that it may, I hate to say it, it may or may not help you. For example, a black, I'm sorry, while we always often think about, black young women are the folks who are most at risk at getting sarcoidosis, right? Plenty of white men can get it too, right? So it happens, right? So don't don't let these clues fake you out. Recognize that there can be a wide a wide variety of ways things can present, and also how gender and sex, gender, sex, age, biological sex, ethnicity can manifest. In first aid, we obviously use mnemonics and trigger words and buzzwords and stuff like that. But again, a lot of things don't classically present that way. Sometimes they themselves are a fake out. So you gotta keep in mind that sometimes it could be more unusual presentation. And if they do use a trigger, even if it is a trigger word presentation, they're not going to use the trigger word or an eponym, like the name of a condition like Janeway lesions or something like that, or Ross spots. They're going to explain it out, and you're going to have to recognize how to identify it there. Pathology is often where you see, again, X-ray images or gross specimens or histopath or whatever. Just keep in mind that a lot of the times, again, you can, if you talk to RX coaches, you don't want to look at those images as the first thing. You're going to be looking at the lead-in, and then the distractors, and then reading back through the stem. And then you'll look at the image, and you use that to complete the picture, literally complete the picture. And you'll often find that you'll get to a reasonable answer even without looking at the clinical image. The same thing goes with the handful of multimedia items that you get on the exam, okay? So don't let these images and videos and sounds freak you out and throw you off your game. You can like I said, you can often solve it from other clues within the case presentation or how they structure the question. Pharmacology, this has gone through some changes. Now, while it's crammable, because again, it tends to focus on recurring things like mechanism and toxicity, they have changed in the sense about a year ago, they stopped testing for therapeutics. So they're not going to ask, hey, what's the best drug for this or whatever. That's now all step 2. So when you study, you need to just, really focus on the prototypes, the major variants. If you want to go for, mastery, sure, you can go for the minor variants. You'll never need to know trade names or dosages. Only reason to know them is as, a kind of a mnemonic, or when you're really fleshing out that mental framework you had through what we call elaboration, right? Most of the drugs are in these 6 categories, and those are all covered in first aid. And again, because it's therapeutics, it's almost always this will be in a clinical scenario or a lab scenario. So got to tie to all the and integrate with all the other disciplines like pathology, biochem, physio, and so forth. Physiology, as I said, tends to be concept oriented, very very dependent on the domain. So again, diagrams or mind maps really help really well in terms of understanding all those relationships, like the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis and all that stuff, and what stimulates what inhibits what, that type of stuff. A lot of times these days, the physiology is almost indistinguishable from the pathology. So pathophysiology, and again, almost always in the form of a clinical vignette with multi-step integration. Psychiatry, here it tends to be a mix of psychology, sociology, and psychopharmacology. There are, while mood disorders are super high yield, there's a bunch of these other things like personality disorders and as well too, that tends to show up on the exam. And again, we cover that fairly well in First Aid Step 1. All right, public health. This has been on the move in the last couple of years. While traditionally it's about biostats and epi and some ethics and law, and it also historically has had some healthcare delivery, patient safety and quality improvement, but a lot of that is moving to Step 2 CK. What has really emerged in the last year or two are these doctor-patient interaction vignettes, where a patient comes in and then you play doctor. You say, this is how I would respond to that patient. And again, these should be based on principles. This is not, quote unquote, necessary common sense. We have a lot of these communications and patient engagement rules and guidelines, covered in Step 1. So definitely learn those guidelines, and we have well over 100 questions in our QBank that handles this. So definitely make sure you get that practice on those types of scenarios. All right, so that was a pretty quick whirlwind tour through it. I don't expect you to get all that. I do have a copy of this talk on my blog, firstaidteam.com. I will show you that later if you want to get a copy of this presentation. So not to worry. All right, now let's talk about review resources. There's a ton of stuff out there. More things that you use that you have time for or budget for, right? In terms of QBanks, text, reviews, digital apps, mobile apps, and so forth. So in terms of picking and choosing, there's a couple of simple rules to keep in mind. One is, check out the resource reviews, just kind of read through First Aid for USMLE Step 1, and in Section 4, we have abbreviated grades, but you can go to our blog at firstaidteam.com, and we'll show that to you again, where you can, read into much more in-depth, kind of like a consumer report of these reviews. And we survey, U.S. students, international students, IMGs, every year to get the best recommendations. Once you know what it is, start using these resources early. Try to integrate them into your learning and your classwork, and try to get two birds with one stone, right? If you're studying for pathology for your exam, well, study from these resources, because when you come back, you'll be able to go right back through it, and you'll be that much further ahead. Try not to overbuy. Almost all of these resources these days are on demand or available in 1-2 days on Amazon, even internationally these days. Logistics are so good, but I do recognize that the pandemic has slowed things down. But especially for digital resources, all on demand anyway. Or as an app. So try not to overbuy. And then lastly, certain resources may be great in certain areas, or certain things maybe work well, with one subject area, but not work well with others. So just keep that in mind. It's not a one-size-fits-all scenario. All right. Excellent. Let's ask one more question. I want to find out, what resources will you likely use? It could be none of the above or all of the above. After we talked about what's available out there, what are you going to do? So check all that applies. So here it takes a little longer for whatever reason. Again, maybe because collecting all the data internationally. So I will wait a couple more seconds longer to get some data. So I'll pause here for a couple seconds. All right, we are around 50%. Going to keep it open for another 5-10 seconds until maybe 2/3 of you have answered. So it looks like that has happened. Let me go ahead and close the poll and share the answer. So what you see here is that it's universal. Almost everybody uses a question bank, and then the majority of you will be using review books like First Aid or videos, you know, and then a fair chunk of you are using flashcards and mobile apps as well too. We're seeing more mobile apps on the rise, especially as these apps get more sophisticated over time. So no surprises there. Let me get back to the presentation. So, if you were to talk to our RX coaches, they can help, craft, very, very tailored strategies and tailored plans for you based on your strengths and weaknesses and so forth. But, in general, there's also some universal advice that just works with just about everybody. So I'll go through it, and then I'll ask Sean and Paras to jump in as well too, and maybe share some of their secret sauce tips in terms of how they help their students get and IMGs get top scores on the USMLE. So first thing is, really, plan ahead. So really establishing a study schedule and sticking with it. I'm going to skip around here, and if you really make sure you don't overschedule, so taking time off at least once a day, even during your dedicated period, to recover, be a human being, and also if you use our checklist in the front for planning, and you kind of really, as I say, stay relaxed and grounded and keep the high view, and then you should be fine, and you shouldn't really have to make adjustments. You want to make sure there's wide latitude to make smaller adjustments, but again, so you want to have some flexibility. But you want to be very careful about wholesale changes. As I mentioned earlier, one of the themes is integrate, integrate, integrate. Every time you learn a new concept, in fact, the next thing you want to learn is what is that? How does that connect to other things that I've learned? So so test yourself, make it a game. How many jumps can you do from one concept to the next, right? With regards to integration. Remember those crammable subjects I mentioned: metabolic pathways, microbiology, pharmacology. Subjects that have a lot of repeatable logic structures or conceptual structures. Those are the ones that are easier to cram. Now, let me be straightforward with you. You do not want to cram for the USMLE Step 1. I mean, this is an exam that's covering 2 years of medical school, 3 years if you're coming from an international school. And so this is not something that you just want to stay for the night before. But if you're getting towards the end and so forth, in the week or two ahead of time, you might circle back to some of these crammable subjects to keep it in short-term memory for the purposes of the exam. And that's what the rapid review is in the back of First Aid. The other thing is you want to prioritize things that you've already learned, right? Because that's going to be your bedrock. You already know that. You want to build from things that you're already familiar with. So obviously the effort is less, less confusion, less frustration, less burnout. Then you move to other material that's high yield, but that you haven't learned before. And so those are a couple of the study tips that we often talk about. But let's see if our RX coaches have any special RX tips to share with you. So Sean, Paras, anything else to add here? Or do you have any secret sauce tips to share?
Yeah,
Well, thank you, Dr. Lee.
Oh, go ahead, Sean.
Go ahead, No, go ahead, Paras.
I was just going to say, I know you mentioned this, but we do have that USMLE RX study planner as well. And, that's something that another RX coach, Alec, and I had actually kind of walked through how to make a study schedule and a study planner. And that can really help prioritize and organize all of this material, so you kind of can take that mental stress out of it. And it's kind of good to be able to then work with either an RX coach like ourselves or someone else to come up with what exactly is the right study plan. So I think coming up with that study plan is probably the really good first step.
Fantastic. Sean?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lee. One thing I always mention is utilizing those assessments. A lot of students are reluctant to take those assessments, but they feel like if they take it, the score's not going to be high enough. They're going to feel badly about it. But remember that it's a tool. It's there to guide your studying. And if you take that assessment, you use it for the right purpose, you use it to make a study plan, to assess your strengths and weaknesses, it'll be a great tool that'll really set you up for success.
Great, fantastic. We'll talk about those CBSSA, those NBME assessments in just a little bit. All right, so let's keep rolling. We're about a quarter till the hour, so I think we're tracking along quite nicely here. So the exam is called a CBT, computer-based test. That's their fancy little acronym here. So you may see this term, in some of their tutorials and whatnot. So that's all it is. There are some keyboard shortcuts. Just keep an eye on the end. And as you probably figured out from now, we've been saying, hey, look, you got to be doing questions, all the way throughout and at the end. And there's a ton of learning science data that supports this, and that's why I just put that up. Some of these studies were published in really high impact journals like the Journal of Science, and even made the front page of the New York Times. And so one of the major studies by a guy named Jeff Karpik, at University of Purdue several years ago, found that if you do lots of questions, if you had, let's say, if everybody had 2 hours to study, and all you did was just spend the entire time not cramming or whatever, but just doing questions, you're going to do better than the people that are cramming or just looking once or even concept mapping. And that advantage holds up even if you are doing, more complex, sophisticated questions. So when it comes to computer-based testing options, there's all kinds of resources out there, right? You're already familiar with the free 120. That's the USMLE sample test. That's helpful. Tends to be a little simpler than the actual exam in terms of the complexity of the STEM and whatnot. Sometimes some students will use that as a kind of a way to relax, before an exam, if you can call that relaxing. NBME, so the NBMEs, they're up to into the low 30s already. These are helpful for benchmarking, and they're available for $50 to $70. Some of them now have explanations to the answers, and they're good for benchmarking because they can extrapolate to a USMLE score. Now we'll see what they'll after this thing goes pass fail, they'll probably extrapolate to a pass fail, and then probably what's your risk of failing. Hopefully they'll give you some sort of sense of that. And then there's obviously Q banks like USMLE-Rx and UWorld and stuff like that. That's obviously excellent for practicing, studying, for doing along with classwork and whatnot, and also for simulation because you can use the self-assessments, or in the case of USMLE-Rx, you can go in and create a half-day or full-day test just out of our Q bank, which goes beyond the self-assessments, the 2 self-assessments that we provide. All right, great. Let's talk a little bit about more learning science about what do we know about how these things perform and what works better. So so one question is what are better, question banks and flashcards? Clearly, question banks have been proven to be superior. And the reason is not hard to understand. The questions and the structure of the questions and the logic are much more realistic or authentic to the real exam, whereas flashcards tend to be these simple, non-vignette questions. Still useful. I mean, the next question is, how many board-style questions do you need to do better on the exam? Turns out the answer varies, but roughly 300 and 450 questions to do one question better, 1 point better on the USMLE Step 1. So if you were, for example, to do our USMLE question bank, you can probably gain 10 to 12 points on the exam. Even after adjusting for MCAT and GPA scores and stuff like that. So we take all that into account. How many questions should you do? The answer is nobody knows. But the study that looked at this at a University of Michigan that showed that students who did more, at least above 3,200 questions, had the best performance. But we don't know. They didn't ask if they did above 5,000, 7,000. at some point you will reach a point of diminishing returns, but we don't know exactly where that is. The other question that often comes is, should you repeat a Q bank? You can certainly repeat questions if you want for the purposes of learning, but if you're doing for the testing effect, which is, because of the testing effect, it forces, that the retrieval practice that you just read about in that Karpicki study. Unique MC, doing non-repeated multiple choice questions is the best, as opposed to repeat questions. Here's the reason why. Subconsciously, what happens when you repeat a multiple choice question? Sometimes you can answer the question not because based on based on you solving it, from the presentation, but something about how that presentation was put together. Like, for example, the patient was wearing, that might not even have anything to do with it. Like, oh, the patient was playing volleyball, or the patient was, wearing a checkered shirt or whatever. That could clue you in. And so, this is defined by a certain phenomenon called fluency. Fluency means you look familiar, you think you know it, but you really don't know it, because something else gave it away, right? That had nothing, and you would never obviously see on that in the USMLE because you're not getting repeated questions, right? And then lastly, so again, that's why we often recommend doing multiple question banks, because you need well more than 3,000 questions in a lot of places, and also you'll often run out of questions in a certain subject area, like, I don't know, genetics or pharmacology, and you're going to need multiple resources. And then lastly, no surprise, and we didn't do this study, those students who go through multiple passes of first aid do better. What we have also found out, and what we've seen, is that people who actively learn first aid. So what I mean actively learn, it's not just going through highlighting your first aid, it's making flashcards out of it or doing flashcards. So as you know, we have first aid flash facts, which are 13,000 flashcards tied to first aid. And so if you use that, and then it shows you the first aid fact, then that is an active way of learning first aid and can really boost your impact, in terms of better performing or lowering your risk of failing on the USMLE. All right, so that's the learning science. That's a bunch of, hopefully that's helped, but good to know that learning science is a thing like medical science, and can help you absolutely do better. All right, so let's talk about some test day tips here. On that day, you're going to often be a little hyped up, so think about how much or how little stimulants you should be going in with. You're also going to be going into a heavily air-conditioned center. A lot of times it tends to be cold. The Prometric Center have these very stringent environmental things, and they often end up being chilly. That being said, sometimes you may get direct sunlight depending on where you're at or whatever. So dress comfortably with lyrics so you can adjust during the time you're there. Again, our RX coaches like Sean and Paras and Alex and Brian, other of those folks, they're going to lead you through our special 7-step method for breaking down questions. But even if you don't have an opportunity to work with one of our wonderful coaches, still in an abbreviated version, make sure you still look at the lead-in first, especially if it's a long question, because that clues you into what you're supposed to be looking for, what dynamic they're asking for, is it diagnosis, treatment, genetics, whatever, and then that clues you in about what to try to pick up when you're going through the vignette. In terms of managing the clock, again, you got 60 minutes and 40 questions, right? So that works out to 90 seconds per question. We strongly recommend that you make a commitment to an answer within 70 seconds of reading that question. So if you do that and you mark the questions that you're unsure about but may still be solvable, if you do that, then you should end up with 10 to 15 minutes at the end to go back and work on some of those tougher questions. And by the way, it's okay to second guess yourself. The learning psychology literature is fairly convincing. people say, oh, no, never second guess yourself. That actually is a myth. If you can keep working some questions, you can, potentially do better. And so, but just remember, don't overdo it. You have limited time. In terms of lunches, breaks, and so forth, a lot of it needs to be synced to your energy level during the day. So if you know that your energy level naders or drops during a certain point of the day, like right after, I don't know, 11 or 10 o'clock or whatever, you might want to kind of strategically schedule your, block breaks there, right? So maybe 2 blocks, then take a break or not. But so some people do 2, 2, and 1. Others will do 3, 2, and 2. It's totally up to you and so forth. Again, in USMLE-Rx, you can go in and set up a 280 item exam that allows you to simulate a full day test and really figure out whether where you need to schedule your breaks and your snack breaks and your light lunches and so forth. Finally, you gotta have a strategy for when you don't when you have no clue what's going on. My study group, we call it the C reflex, right? There's a small C nerve fibers and so forth. But also, that's for us, if we didn't know what the answer was and we could not eliminate any of the distractors, we would just go for C, right? At the end of the day, you need to, as I mentioned, there is no a penalty for guessing. So you should never ever leave a question unanswered. And you should save your time and move on to more solvable questions, right? Even ones where you have to second guess yourself, because chances are you'll do better. The other thing to keep in mind is that there are several questions on the exam that are either experimental questions or kind of what you call these kind of like psychometric diagnostic questions, so that they can get a sense of how well the exam is performing. And some of these, so if you run into one of these questions that just seems completely unsolvable, again, take your best guess, C, B, whatever, move on, and hope it's one of those experimental or kind of a diagnostic questions that's meant to keep an eye on the performance of the exam.